The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. We would like to now hand over to Judge Silver Cartwright to read out the decision. Judge Cartwright, you may now proceed.
Thank you, President. The trial chamber has deliberated and makes the following ruling concerning the various applications concerning Ieng Sari's fitness to participate in trial made today by International Counsel on his behalf. The trial chamber has as its starting point the decision on the fitness of Ieng Sari to participate in the trial. That decision was based on consideration of all the relevant expert testimony and evidence, and after having granted the parties an opportunity to present submissions. With that as its starting point, however, the expert indicated that Ieng Sari's physical condition may well change from time to time, and the trial chamber is conscious of that and of its responsibility to keep his physical condition under constant consideration. With that in mind, the doctor treating Ieng Sari issued a medical report this morning to the trial chamber based on his examination of the accused today. And in English, the summary is that Ieng Sari cannot follow the proceedings from the courtroom. The doctor went on to request that he be permitted to follow proceedings from the holding cells, which would enable the doctor to more readily monitor Ieng Sari's physical condition. In considering the applications made today by International Counsel, the trial chamber must make the preliminary point that in assessing Ieng Sari's fitness to stand trial, it can rely only on medical opinion. It has decided that in accordance with the provisions of Rule 81.5, the difficulties caused by having Ieng Sari come to the courtroom, or his difficulties in providing that Ieng Sari come to the courtroom, would reach a level that might cause substantial delay to the trial, and for that reason it has decided to direct Ieng Sari to participate from the holding cells. In making this decision, it also takes into account that all technical support to facilitate his participation is available in the holding cells, including a direct telephone line to his counsel. The trial chamber also bears in mind that participation from the holding cell was recommended by the expert for that reason, namely that there are the technical facilities to enable him to participate, but as importantly that the physical facilities recommended by the expert make the holding cell more appropriate given Mr. Ieng Sari's physical circumstances, more appropriate than the courtroom itself. As to its ongoing obligation to monitor Ieng Sari's fitness, the trial chamber will rely on the treating doctor to alert it to any substantial change in Ieng Sari's physical condition. And it needs to be emphasized that it is medical monitoring that is required, not monitoring by the judges or defense counsel personally or by the public. For that reason, the court declines to rule that Ieng Sari be videotaped while he is in the holding cells. It will rely on his treating doctor to bring any concerns about Ieng Sari's physical condition to its attention. The other application that was made by the Ieng Sari International Council is that the doctor be called to be examined in court today, that is the treating doctor. The medical report is sufficiently clear for the trial chamber, and it has decided that there is no need to call his treating doctor to elaborate on that report in any way. President, I hope that that has conveyed the entire decision of the trial chamber.
The President, thank you. Judge Cartwright, Counsel Canoas, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Your Honors. I just want to have a point of clarification before we have to make a decision, which we don't take very lightly. It is our understanding that the trial chamber does not want any monitoring of Mr. Ieng Sari other than by the doctor, so that, for instance, if Mr. Ieng Sari is asleep, the doctor can just watch him, but then we don't have a record. That is our concern. And it appears that the trial chamber is deliberately trying to to avoid a situation where we would have a record upon which to make further applications as to why Mr. Ieng Sari should either be severed from the case or we should have the proceedings delayed. So, with your ruling, are we to understand it that you are preventing the defense from videotaping Mr. Ieng Sari down there while the proceedings are going on? We will do it on our own. We want a record. We want a contemporaneous record. We don't want a doctor who is going to be writing something down. We want a video. The video would speak for itself. That's what we are asking. We understand you don't want him in court. God forbid the public see him. You don't want to use the equipment that you have. The telephone, he cannot reach for the telephone anyway. And if he's semi-conscious, that doesn't do us any good. So, we have one simple request, and that is, may we be allowed to have a representative of the Ieng Sari defense team to videotape him as the proceedings are going on, so we have a record and we know exactly his state of affairs. If the answer is no, I understand your position, but frankly, I cannot participate in these proceedings if the whole purpose is to make sure that a record is not being made, because we don't think the doctor monitoring his health is the same as monitoring whether he's following the proceedings. There is a vast difference. I think what we're asking is not intrusive. It doesn't affect the parties in any way. It won't slow down the proceedings. It won't cost anything to anyone, especially the donors. And I see no reason why we should not be allowed to videotape. So in the event he is unable to follow the proceedings, we have a record, we can make further applications, and if the court denies those applications, we at least have a record for the Supreme Court. Thank you.
The President, International Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Your Honour. Just briefly, of course, the prosecution has no objection and thinks it's wise that the accused be monitored in the cells. That's what the professor has said. And as Your Honours are aware, in the detention facility, there is a health report book where incidents can be monitored or incidents can be recorded. And certainly the prosecution's position is that Yang Sari's health should be monitored. As to whether it's done by video or whether it's done by the doctor or an assistant and recording any deterioration in health or any problem like that, information like that should be recorded, and that's always been our position. As to whether or not the utility of a video recording whether the accused is asleep, one can only question whether that is of much use, bearing in mind that the doctor, the professor, hadn't complained, or the Yang Sari hadn't complained to him that he would fall to sleep on throughout the day. The complaints were issues of dizziness and issues like that. So the professor, as Your Honours have heard, the professor has said whether the accused chooses to participate in the proceedings, chooses to follow the proceedings, that's really a question for him. But what the professor said was that he was capable of following the proceedings all day. If the accused chooses to fall asleep for an hour or 2 hours, just decides to go to sleep rather than follow the proceedings, that really isn't the issue. So Your Honours have to think about the value of that videotape of a sleeping accused, bearing in mind the expert evidence stating that he has the ability to stay awake throughout the day. If he chooses to fall asleep, that's really a matter for him, and he's waived his right to follow the proceedings. But as far as monitoring the accused's health, that is important, and we would submit that certainly there are facilities enough there with the health report book in the detention facility centre, and any deterioration of health should be recorded. As to whether or not he should be videotaped, Your Honours, we will leave that to you, but we would just ask you to consider the utility of videotaping someone who perhaps may voluntarily decide to go to sleep. That's really not the issue of whether or not he's got the ability to follow the proceedings. Your Honour, just one last matter whilst I'm here. The prosecution didn't get an opportunity to respond to the defence reply, but the prosecution takes exception to the remarks by the defence that the prosecution are not concerned as to whether Yang Sari participates or not in the proceedings. They just want to get a conviction. Those remarks are offensive, they're objectionable. The practice of the prosecution office over the last year should be clear that the prosecution is concerned about presenting the evidence of the allegations and ensuring a fair trial. If that wasn't the case, the prosecution wouldn't have supported, in the end, the severance of Yung Turit from this case. Those types of remarks are not appropriate for this court, and the public should not think that that sort of slanderous, unsubstantiated behaviour by any counsel before this court is acceptable behaviour. The prosecution don't accept it, and we would ask that Your Honour, in the future, admonish the defence for those types of unsubstantiated remarks. It's a privilege and a responsibility to appear before this court, and our roles, we should not abuse our roles by making submissions that are not based on evidence and are offensive. Thank you.
The President, Counsel Canawas, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, let me respond to the prosecution's outrage by merely pointing out that here they go again. On the one hand, they say we can monitor his health, but we cannot monitor to see whether he's following the proceedings. he chooses to fall asleep. He's an 88-year-old man who is hyperventilating by merely being transported over here. So obviously, we don't want to have any record that would interfere with some sort of an analysis at the end that he had a fair trial. And there's where we draw the distinction. And that's why we say that the prosecution is not necessarily interested in our client's rights. We are. If they were, they would be supporting us to monitor by video what he's doing. It can be up to you or some other expert to decide whether he is willingly sleeping or whether he's simply incapable of staying awake because of his heart problems, because of the fatigue and what have you. Why is the prosecution, or anyone else for that matter in this courtroom, afraid of a record? Why not have a little sunshine? If the gentleman was here, if Mr. Ingsari was here, we could see it. I could intervene. Because if Mr. Ingsari is in a holding cell and is falling asleep, I will be making interventions. That's why we want to have one of our team members, and we want to monitor the proceedings by video.
The President Counsel Canavas, please do not reopen this Pandora's box again. You only are allowed to reply to what the prosecutors has just indicated, and please limit your observation to that confinement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I simply want to restate our position that monitoring the health is different from monitoring whether he's capable of following or is following the proceedings. Hence why we want to make sure that we have a recording. So, if we are not permitted to be in the holding cell and to record our client's state of being, then I'm afraid we cannot participate in these proceedings because it would be essentially a trial in absentia.
Your Honour, if I could just make one brief response to correct the record. The prosecution did not state that we object to the videotaping of Yang Sari in the cells. The prosecution said we would leave it up to Your Honours. So that's one misrepresentation of the evidence and of the submission. And secondly, the prosecution did not state that the accused shouldn't be monitored. The prosecution has said the accused should be monitored by the doctor or the carer, and that should be recorded in the book. So, again, counsel seems to forget the evidence and goes off on some tirade of his own. And we would ask that the counsel stick to the evidence, listen to the submissions, and then perhaps his submissions will be more effective for Your Honours to take note of.
The President, the Chamber would like to hand over to Judge Cartwright to continue on the ruling by the Chamber, and hopefully once and for all the issue will be ultimately resolved. Judge Cartwright, you may now proceed.
Thank you, President. The trial chamber has already ruled that it will not direct the videotaping of the accused in the holding cells, and it does not intend to amend that ruling in any way. Normally, the chamber does not allow counsel to seek clarifications or to raise or repeat arguments concerning a ruling that has been made. On this occasion, exceptionally, it allowed it. The primary issue for the trial chamber is the medical assessment of Ieng Sari's fitness to participate at trial. Therefore, medical monitoring by his treating doctor is important as a means of keeping the trial chamber and the parties informed of Ieng Sari's medical condition should it change. That is one of the reasons why it's more appropriate for him to remain in the holding cells, where the doctor is better able to keep him under careful review. The Ieng Sari team may, if it chooses, have a staff member of its defence team in the holding cell. That staff member is entitled, should he or she think it appropriate, to draw any concerns about Ieng Sari's physical condition to the treating doctor. However, no videotaping will be permitted. I hope that's covered the trial chamber's ruling, President.
The President. Thank you, Judge Cartwright. Next, we would like to hand over to counsel for Mr. Nuntia, who was willing actually to raise some concern this morning. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, good morning, everyone. Your Honor, just some unfinished business from the week prior to last week, that is with respect to the civil party ORRI, TCCP 105. As usual, at the conclusion of that party's testimony, you opened the floor, Mr. President, for comment by all the parties on the statement of suffering by the civil party. I was on my feet and attempted to take the floor several times, but I was not given permission to do so. And if I'm not mistaken, at some point, Judge Cartwright was overheard telling you to eject me from the courtroom. I'm not sure what that was all about. But in any event, I have 3 points that I'd like to make with respect to the statement of suffering of the civil party ORRI from the week prior to the recess. And my first point, very simply, is that we, the defense, the Nuntia defense team, take absolutely no exception to civil parties putting questions to the chamber, putting requests to the chamber that they be permitted to ask questions of an accused person. Of course, we accept that the civil parties are full parties to the proceedings. They are allowed to make requests to the chamber just like any other party. So, of course, whether or not those requests are granted is a separate issue. They may make such a request, and we have no issue with that. Again, their rights as civil parties stop there, stop at the point where they are allowed to make that request. If accused persons have made it clear that they do not wish to submit to questions, that they exercise their right to silence, then of course the civil party's right to ask those questions is curtailed at that point. And this takes me to my next point, and it's very much related to the point that I've just made, And again, let me take us back to Friday, the 23rd of November. That was the last time we sat before the recess. Mr. Ori put a question to you, Mr. President, a request to you through his counsel to put a question to Khieu Samphan. You indicated that that question could be put indirectly by you, Mr. President. At which point, our colleague, Ms. Gisei, was on her feet to inform you and the Chamber of Khieu Samphan's position. You, Mr. President, at that stage, quite inappropriately in my submission, instructed Ms. Gisei to sit down and announced that you were speaking directly to Khieu Samphan. There was a bit of a back and forth, and in the end, again, in my submission, you, quite unreasonably, told Ms. Gisei to sit down, that it was not her time to speak. At which point, Khieu Samphan was forced to his feet to tell you that, of course, he asserted his right to remain silent, as we all knew he would, as Ms. Gisei was about to tell you. So my point on this issue is, when one of us, me, Ms. Gisei, Mr. Carnavas, my colleagues, any of us, stand up and make submissions on behalf of our clients, we're telling you our client's position. We're speaking for and on behalf of our clients. There's absolutely no reason, and I can't even imagine an exceptional circumstance where perhaps you could intervene. There's no reason for you to drive a wedge between counsel and parties. Parties are represented by counsel because it is their right. It's a right they've exercised. Every one of these individuals has exercised that right, and we're here to defend those individuals. So I personally take great exception to the treatment that you handed out to Ms. Gisei last week, and I would suggest that you perhaps have a look, perhaps reacquaint yourself with the Code of Judicial Ethics, both the ECCC Code and the Cambodian Code of Judicial Ethics that applies to you. I think the treatment of Ms. Gisei last week was utterly unacceptable, and I did try to say that on the record last week. And before you tell me that this doesn't concern me or it doesn't, because Khieu Samphan is not my client, I just want to make it very clear that we're all here to do a job, to represent our counsel, or our clients, and we would appreciate it if you respected that. And finally,
President, thank you very much, Counsel. We have heard you enough. However, you already reviewed the document, and I believe you made some mistakes. It was not a civil party by the name of Auri. It should be Chau Ni. Even just a name of a civil party you can't even recall. The floor is enough for you, and we thank you very much.
It was indeed Chavni. It was an oversight on my part. If you were trying to imply that I was doing that for a deliberate reason, I would just like to make it clear it was simply an oversight. And I had one last point to make, my third and final point, with respect to the statement of suffering.
President, as I indeed said, we already took note of your remarks, and it is a lesson for the bench, and in order to improve the management of the proceedings in the near future. And of course, I only made a remark regarding the relevant civil party that you cited in your remarks, that you can't even make a proper name of that civil party, and that is the point. If you have any other matters to raise, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, for being courteous. One last point related to what I've been saying all morning, and I assure you again, as I said, this will be my last point. At the conclusion of that exchange that was then had between Ms. Gise and Judge Laverne, as to the issue of whether or not, for example, a civil party, in making a statement of suffering, raised a new issue that perhaps, depending on the circumstances, implicated an accused person in some manner. Ms. Gise raised the point, would it be acceptable, would it be allowable, would she in fact be allowed to recall that civil party to put additional questions? And she had what I considered at that point to have been a very courteous exchange with Judge Laverne, and then finally put the question. Judge Laverne, as I recall it, was engaged in that debate and seemed quite interested. I have no idea what his position on it is, obviously, but he seemed quite interested in discussing that with his colleagues. As he stood up, Judge Cartwright was heard telling Nilnan, the president, no, the request shouldn't be allowed, at which point you, Mr. President, said no, the request is not allowed, before there was a proper debate. So that leads me to my question, my final question, my request. Are we appearing before a trial chamber, or are we appearing before what at times seems to me to be a Nilnan-Sylvia Cartwright clique? And I think it's a very important question to ask. It's a very important question to ask. There are 5 of you up there, and there are 5 of you for a reason. We expect a debate on all the issues, and we expect the chamber, not individual judges, to issue decisions. Thank you.
President, I thank you, Counsel. In fact, there are 2 practices that we have done so far. One is the discretion of the President of the trial chamber, and another one is the bench decision. And this practice has also been used in the domestic court. For example, regarding the adjournment or the recess, it is at the discretion of the President of the chamber. There is no need for a bench decision on this procedural matter. And of course, there are times when there needs to be a decision by the bench as a whole. And so far, I have tried my best to adhere to the proceedings and the procedures practiced in this court and in the domestic court. I have tried our best. Of course, I acknowledge there could be a mistake made in the practice of certain discretions. And of course, I strictly follow the procedures and the options that I have. One is the discretion of the President, and the other one is the combined decision of the bench. And I thank you very much for your observation on this matter. The floor is not given again to you, and we will take an early recess. And my apology. Defense Counsel, do you have any other matter to raise?
Yes, Mr. President, I just wanted to thank you for that very candid response, and just to note for the record that if the seating arrangement were different, I suspect the discretion of this court would be exercised in a very different manner.
President, in fact, the time is now only 11:05. We will continue to hear the testimony of the civil party court officer. Could you invite TCCP 188 into the courtroom? President. Good morning, Madam Civil Party. What is your name? Civil Party, my name is Teng Sokha. Thank you. Question. What is your date of birth, if you can recall it? Response. Yes, I can recall it. I was born on the 25th of February 1947. Thank you. Question. Can you tell us your place of birth? Where were you born? Response. I was born at Svai Tanom village, Rumdeng commune, Srai Central district, Kampong Cham province. Thank you. Where is your current address? President, please wait until you see the red light on the microphone. Civil Party. I live at Phum Bay, Songkat, Chrui Chongwa, Tonle Mekong Street, Khan Risai, Phnom Penh. Thank you. Question. What is your current occupation? Response. I am a retiree. Question. What is your father's name? Response. His name is Teng Kui. Question. And your mother, what is her name? Response. Her name is Lee Pach. Question. Are you married? Response. My husband passed away. I am a widow. Question. How many children do you have? Response. Now I have 2 children under my care. And in fact, I have 3, but 1 died during the Khmer Rouge regime. Thank you. Madam Teng Sokha, as a civil party, you may tell the court the harms and suffering inflicted upon you. The harms include both physical and material, and as well as psychological, which could be directly or indirectly inflicted upon you during the regime, which caused you to apply as a civil party, and which are alleged against the charges against the accused for the acts committed during the Khmer Rouge regime. And that is your right. And you may make your statement of suffering at the end of your testimony. However, the chamber advised you from the outset so that you can prepare yourself into making your statement of suffering. The lead co-lawyers for civil parties, pursuant through Internal Rule 91B, the floor is given to you first to put questions to this civil party. And the time allocation a combined time for you and the prosecution is half a day. You may proceed. Good morning, Mr. President. I'd like to assign the floor to the lawyer for civil party Samsakung and my counterpart. President, yes, you may proceed. Samsakung. Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone in and around the courtroom. Good morning, Madam Teng Sokha. My name is Samsakung, a civil party lawyer. I have some questions for you. There will be three main topics. The first topic is related to the events prior to 17 April 1975, and the second topic is related to the second phase of the first phase of movement, and the third topic is the second phase of movement. My question to you now is related to the events prior to 17 April 1975. Where did you live before that day? Response. Mr. President, before 17 April 1975, I lived in my house, but I cannot recall the number of the house. It was along Street 105. It was a wooden house. In fact, it was a concrete house with the upper floor made of wood. It was opposite of Tul Tumpung Pagoda along the Zurich. Question. Prior to 17 April 1975, what events did you observe in Phnom Penh in particular and in the country as a whole? Response. Up to the 16 April 1975, there were fightings and shelling and bombardment. We heard gunfires near and far, and we also heard the shelling. And some people and my relatives were fleeing from various locations. I have some relatives fleeing from Tulkok and Taklaok, and they came to my house to take refuge. And there were some other relatives who had arrived at my house from Kampong Speu province. Another younger relative coming from Tulkok. The relative came with the entire family, but due to the confusing situation and too many relatives, I could not identify which one were living on the ground floor or on the upper floor, and some of them went into the trench. And in fact, during the calm period on the 16th, my mother went to give the offering to the monks at the pagoda, but most of the time we stayed in the trench. Question. On the 16th of April 1975, you stated that your family was in the trench. Can you tell us on what day your family was evacuated from Phnom Penh? Response. It was on 17 April 1975 when our family was evacuated. But in the morning, we were not yet evacuated, and there was still sporadic shelling on the morning of the 17th April. And we were very scared. My mother and my mother-in-law, in fact, fled to her siblings' house in Bangkeng Kong, and another elder sister who came from Tram Khna collected some belongings and returned to kilometer number 4 in Tek La'o. I was also afraid, and I didn't know whether I should stop them from moving to various locations. And my mother and father-in-law went with some other relatives to Bangkeng Kong, and my other elder brother, together with his 3 children, his wife, went to Tek La'o. Although I asked him not to go, but because he was afraid, he left us, he left the trench, and he went with his family with some belongings. In fact, he went first, and then his wife followed. He was so afraid, and his face turned pale and white. And another family of my younger sibling, whose husband was a doctor, in fact fled from Tulkok to come and join us in my house. She was pregnant, and she also had another child. Her name was Janari, and her husband was Aum Lum dead. But that morning I didn't actually speak to her. Only in late afternoon I gave them some clothes, and in the morning they disappeared, they left, but I didn't know where they went to. At that time it was rather confusing. I didn't actually notice who came and who went. Question. Before I put my further question to you, please try to respond briefly and precisely to my question. My question is the following. In the morning of 17 April 1975, you were not yet evacuated from Phnom Penh. As you and your family were still in Phnom Penh, can you tell us when you were evacuated from Phnom Penh? Response. It was in the afternoon. I saw people walking in front of the house, and I saw some Khmer Rouge. They were not armed. And I also noticed that my neighbors coming to the street. So I went outside and we listened to what was spoken by the Khmer Rouge. They instructed us to leave for 3 days, and there was no need for us to bring the belonging. So we came back into the house and we discussed about that. And later on we decided to leave as we were afraid, and as we were already ordered to leave by 5 p.m. So we packed some belongings, but mostly they were light belongings, and we were told that we would only leave for 3 days. At that time, my father-in-law, my younger siblings, and my husband and some of my relatives who came to my house, we left together. There were 14 of us in total when we left, and that was at 5 p.m. on that day. Question. When the Khmer Rouge soldiers came to your house, what did they exactly tell you when they ordered you to leave your house? Response. They did not even just told our family, but they told us, that means my family and the neighbors, that we had to leave for 3 days and then we would return. They did not even speak directly to me, but they spoke to all of us, and I listened to what was said by them. And at that time, there were already people on the street, and there were quite a number of people on the street. And there were some of my cousins who were also walking, passing by my house at the time. So we left our house in late afternoon. Questioned. When you left the house or when you were evacuated, in which direction did you leave? Response. We walked toward the south and then we turned to Monivong Boulevard. My house was almost at the corner, so we took a turn passing the Monivong Boulevard, walking past the Faculty of Law, and by that time there were quite a crowd of people on the street. Question. You said you left your house toward the south. Was the south direction your intended destination? Response. I did not know, in fact, where to go through, but we were instructed to leave, so we left. And our house was to the south of Phnom Penh, and as people were traveling from the north to the south, I just followed the flow. I didn't have any destination in mind, as we were thinking about going away for 3 days only. Question. When you left your house together with other Phnom Penh residents, did you observe any Khmer Rouge soldiers escorting people while walking on the street? Response. I saw Khmer Rouge, quite a number of Khmer Rouge soldiers, and they were pretty young. They carried guns in front of the Faculty of Law, but they spread around. They did not gather as a bunch of soldiers. And by the time we reached the Faculty of Law, it was in late evening already, and it was crowded, and it was quite difficult to move, as we had some belongings, and there were some sick people as well. So by the time we reached that location, it was quite late, and we stayed there. Question. While you were en route together with other people, did you observe any killing of the Tribunal soldiers? Response. On that first night, I did not see any killing. We heard distant shelling and a gunfight. Some young Khmer Rouge soldiers sat nearby the place where we slept. That's the first sin during that first night. I did not see any killing. Question: when did you see the killing of the Tribunal soldiers? The microphone is not activated. Counsel, could you please repeat as the microphone was not on? Civil party. In the morning, we continued our journey toward the south direction, and when we reached Kbal Knot, we were instructed to go to the east. We were not allowed to go to the south or the west, and it was quite congested on the road, and we stayed at the other side of the Monument Bridge, that is on the east side of the bridge, and we tried to look out for other relatives. So we stayed there on the 18th of April, and of course I saw dead people. I saw some people died at the river bank. And in fact, during that late evening, there were still shellings heard.
Question: during the course of your evacuation, apart from seeing the former soldiers of Lono regime killed, could you describe the situation you witnessed concerning the life of the elderly people and the children? Response: during that time, elderly people who were 70 years old or above had very difficult time. One of my uncles had hearing problem. He couldn't hear anything, and he had to be walked all together with other people. And one of my relatives who got injured during the day on the 17th of April, and she was seriously injured by her leg, and she had to walk along with other people. So I could say that elderly people and sick people had a lot of difficult time moving about. I, at the same time, also met some people we knew. We knew that an elderly woman who wandered around aimlessly, and later on we never saw her again. She just disappeared. Question: you say that during the course of the evacuation there were old people, children and women. Can you please tell the chamber how were they treated? For example, in a situation when they fell ill, were they offered any medicine or medical assistance by the Khmer Rouge? Response: I did not remember having seen anyone providing such care to us. By the time we reached perhaps Krabi, we had to spend overnight at the location where the dead body was covered in a mattress, or rather in a rack. like that. And we didn't know that there was a dead body, and we had to sleep next to the body, and we recovered or learned about that only in the morning. We were very terrified after that, and we had to move to other place for spending another night. Question: according to your accounts, you stated that you had to stop at different places during the course of the evacuation. Did you see other dead bodies elsewhere apart from what you saw? Response: the decapitated body was seen thrown along the road. It was at the location where we were about to take the ferry to the other side of the river. I could see that the person, the body belonged to a soldier, because I could see the uniform, the military uniform worn on the body, and it was a beheaded body of a soldier, and we were so terrified having seen that. Question: can you please say that again? Are you saying that the dead body you saw near the ferry dock was that of a soldier or former official? Response: the dead body was seen wearing the khaki kind of fabric. So I could say that he could have been the former official soldier of the former regime. So I could tell that he was not a civilian. Question: you stated earlier on that after you were evacuated from Phnom Penh, your family and you, along with other people, had brought with you some belongings. Can you tell the chamber whether such belongings were also confiscated by any of the Khmer Rouge soldiers along the way? Response: during the course of the evacuation, we had to hide our gold or jewelry in a small bag. But then, when we reached the Cao province, the radio was removed from us. They asked that the radio be offered to Angka, as Angka needed it, and we had no reason to claim the radio back. We were not confiscated any of our properties other than that radio I indicated, but indeed we had to exchange our gold and jewelry for some foodstuff and things we needed to survive. For example, for the ferry fee, we had to also offer them some gold. Question: in which direction or which province was your last destination of the evacuation? Response: the final place I ended up at was Canal Dak village, Bati district of Takao province. My family, my father in particular was the village of Bati or Takao province. And we were stopped or asked by our relatives to stay there because we were family. But my father and other relatives of mine had to go to their hometown in Kampong Speu. Indeed, the family, members of the family were killed by the aerial bombardment, but they insisted that they would go there and reunite to their hometown. Question. I have another question concerning the evacuation again. After you reached, or during the course when you were walking to Takao province, did you see whether people take refuge at any of the pagodas? Response. Actually, I knew very little about the geographical location of Takao, but at night we passed a pagoda. I did not know whether there were any Buddhist monks at that time. And we also passed another pagoda, Wat Kao, and I did not see any monk in that pagoda as well. Question. When you reached Takao, were you properly received? Or how were you received? And how were you treated? Response. At Bati district, we were made to stay in that area. I reunited with some of my family members and we were allowed to live in their house. Of course, we lived with the family we knew. I did not know whether we were treated as the new people, because we noted that there were other new people or evacuees who made their way to this location as well. First we were put together, but later on we were separated. Question. At that location, were your biography taken? Response. I don't remember this very well, but to be sure, I believe that people knew my background. My family all knew that I was a school teacher, and the head of the cooperative could have come to take or to write the biography of mine. I think there were on several occasions that people came to ask me what I did, and I said I was a school teacher. I didn't tell a lie. Question. How long had you lived in Bati? Response. I had been living in that area for quite a long time, perhaps for about 5 months. I didn't take good notice of how long I spent there because I had to spend so much time working, concentrating on collecting leaves or chopping some tree branches, and I was at that same time asked to live separately from other family members of mine. And again, at the beginning, there were a lot of people coming together. We would be allowed to move about freely. For example, we would choose to go to our hometown or other relatives' houses so that we could reunite with them. But then later on, we were not allowed to do that, and we were made to live separately. We, at the beginning, were taught to carry some cow dung to for the fertilizer for our rice paddy. And later on, we knew that some family members were sent to Krang Tachan. Question: apart from being made to live in Takao province, were you also transferred to elsewhere? Response: there was a second wave of evacuation. I had to be transferred on 3 occasions already in the same village. For example, first we stayed at one place, then a few weeks, if not months, later we were made to move to live at Tropiang Ong location, because that location was the place where intellectuals or educated people would be brought together to live in one place, where long house would be built to accommodate us. The Chinese or the peasants would be allowed to live elsewhere, not to mingle with this group of educated people. There were also soldiers and police who were evacuated from Phnom Penh, but we never saw them there, because we never saw this group of people living together with the base people any longer. Question: you said that there's a second wave of evacuation. When was that exactly? Response: to the best of my recollection, it was before the rainy season. There was not yet heavy rain, so I believe it could have been in July or August when we had to move from Tropiang Ong village. We were not told where we would be going. We only were told that we would be moving to the new village. First, we were loaded onto trucks, and I asked my family, or my family came to us to try to stop us from getting on the trucks. However, none could escape, because every last member of the group had to be loaded onto the truck and move to a new village. And finally, we end up being sent to Posat province by trucks. We reached Posat at night. Question: you said that there was a second evacuation. Can you tell the chamber what kind of people were involved in the second evacuation to Posat province? Response: when we got to Posat, it was in the evening. I could only tell that there were some fresh charcoal, and we could see that people could just left the area, because the smoke, the charcoal could tell us that there were people who had been living there before we got there. And before we left our village in the Bati, there were a lot of other villagers who had to be on the move, and everyone had to be transferred to Prasad Pagoda before we were loaded onto the trucks to Posat. Indeed, we were not told whether we would be transported to Posat. We learned upon arriving only, because we had to also engage in a train trip. We were on the train on one occasion before we reached Posat. Question: during the second phase of the evacuation, when you were transferred from Bati district, could you tell the chamber how were you transported, or how did you travel? Response: we were taking the truck. There were no seats. We were made to sit on the floor, on the track, and indeed our names would be called by the people to get on the tracks, and we could carry with us some belongings, some buckets, but we were not allowed to bring with us any knives or machetes, because they told us that we did not need to worry about bringing them with us, as these materials would be ready at the place where we would be going to. Question: on the tracks did you see any Khmer Rouge soldiers? Response: there was a driver and his co-driver wearing black clothes. There were people who were in the transporting unit. I did not know whether they were soldiers, because we passengers were made to sit at the back of the truck, not in the cabin. So we did not know whether these people were soldiers. Question: from Takao to Posat province, during this course of your journey, did you see whether people were killed or someone could have been tortured? Response: I'm afraid I don't understand your question. Could you rephrase it? Are you talking about the trip? I mean, during the course of the journey, or when I already got to Posat? Question: I would like to rephrase it. My question is, during the course of your journey, did you see whether people were executed or tortured? Response: when I was on the track, I did not see any people being killed, but indeed the road was not good. We had a bumpy ride, and when we got on the train, before we reached Posat, I heard gunfire, and I was told that the people were trying to escape. That's why they were shot at. So we had to travel by trucks and train. And I did not see dead people, but I saw sick people who got some diarrhea. Question: you stated that during the second phase of the evacuation, you saw sick people, people who had some diarrhea. Having seen this, how did the Khmer Rouge soldiers who accompanied you on the track treating these people? Response: they didn't come to check what happened at the back of the truck. They only stayed there in the cabin. They didn't talk. They didn't care what exactly happened at the back. Question: without proper attention, medical care to them, how was the condition of these sick people? Response: every passenger was very sad. People could not say anything. People had to be squeezed together at the back of the truck, and we would eat our food. And since the ride was a bumpy one, I could not carry my child. I had to make sure that he could lie down and I could offer him some food. We were not allowed to stop for meals. We could make use of the time being on the truck to have our meals. Question: you said the driver and co-driver were in black clothes. Were there any Khmer Rouge soldiers sitting at the back of the truck? Response: no, there was none of them sitting there. There were only people, passengers or civilians. Question: you said that you have 3 children. One passed away during the Khmer Rouge regime. Can you tell the chamber in which particular period your child died? Response: I think I already responded that I have 3 children, and now I am a pensioner, and one of the child was born after 1979. During the Khmer Rouge regime, I had only 2 children. But when I say 3 children, I refer to my 3rd child who was born after the Khmer Rouge regime. Question: did your child die during the Khmer Rouge? Response: yes, she did. My second daughter died during the second phase of the evacuation, indeed when we reached Battambang. Question: how did she die? Response: she died because of lack of food. Her body became swollen. She had experienced severe diarrhea, and without proper medical service, she died by early 1976. Question: I have a final question to you, please. What difficulties have you encountered, or what difficulties you have had as the result of the Khmer Rouge regime? Response: I have suffered greatly already, mentally and physically, from the day when we left Phnom Penh. I lost my parents and friends and relatives. By the time we reached Knal Dat, we reunited with family members. I was very happy to see them, but then we were separated again. I was demoralized. And by the time I got to Battambang, the situation was so serious that I was alone in the jungle. I was helpless. There was no shelter, no food, no medicine. And we had to collect bamboos and woods to build our home. We started from scratch. I did not know any person who I had known before, and everyone had to live a very difficult life. A lot of people got seriously sick and die every now and then. So the memory of the hardship in Battambang still lives with me, and I could recall that I did not have anything to eat, and because I went without food, I had to eat worms, some kind of very worms that were not edible, and we were reduced to no human beings but monkeys. We had to eat every kind of leaves we could really lay our hands on. For example, we ate the sour leaves, and it tastes sweet already by then because we were so hungry. And no medicine was offered. We could never find any kind of medicine, or freedom was also limited. Question: do you still live with these difficult memories? The President: Council, please be advised that civil party will indeed offer the opportunity to express her statement of suffering by the end of her testimony during the course of the evacuation, both first and second phase. By that, we would like to ask that Council stop asking civil party to do that, because we do not wish to mislead parties to the proceeding and the civil party herself, because she would then be offered the opportunity to do so, not now, but by the end of the testimony. Council Somsakung: thank you very much, Mr. President. With that, I have no further question, and I thank you very much indeed to Madame Tung Sokha for responding to all the questions. The President, Council, you may proceed. You have 10 more minutes before lunch adjournment.
Very well. I shall begin and then finish later this afternoon. Good morning once again, Civil Party. I have a few further questions to you to perhaps add some detail to one or two points that you've already brought up with my colleague, and also on some fresh elements. You said that you were living in Phnom Penh and that you were living in a house and that you had 2 daughters. Could you please tell us the age of your children when you lived in Phnom Penh just before the 17th of April?
Response. My eldest daughter was 6 years old, and my second daughter was 3 years old.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Perhaps I missed something, but I would like to ask you once again what your profession was when you were in Phnom Penh and what your husband's profession was too.
Response. My husband was a math teacher, and I was a school teacher before 1973, but by 1974 or 1975, I was a teacher trainee.
Thank you. So you said that people dressed in black came to see you in your house, telling you had to leave for 3 days. When the people came, did you hear them use the word encore?
Response. No, I didn't hear the term encore, but they told us to leave the capital city for 3 days because they had to empty the city to check every last member of the enemy. These people were seen carrying short guns, wearing caps, so I could see that these people were some senior people.
And as you've just said, they said you had to leave the city so that they could check to make sure that there were no further enemies in the city. But did they quote any other reasons as well?
Response. No, we were not explained about any other thing other than the enemy, and we were told that we had to leave because we were not supposed to mingle with the enemies. We were afraid already that we did not want to associate ourselves with any of the perceived enemies, and they even told us to leave the city jokingly. I could feel like it was not very serious in their tone. They asked us to leave the city. We were reluctant at the beginning not to leave the city. We would like to stay overnight in Phnom Penh because we had to wait for my husband who went out searching for his relatives. But we could not contest such order as everyone else was seen leaving the capital city, and we did not want to imply that we were opposing such instruction.
Est-ce que vous pensez
Did you believe that you were going to come back after 3 days? Did you believe what you were told?
Response. Since we did not know what would happen, there was some level of belief. We were at that time convinced that we would be allowed to come back. That's why we walked rather slowly, because we would like to really buy time. You know, after 3 days, we would not want to move further from the capital city, because we would like to come back after these 3 days. So no one could explain to us any other reasons behind this evacuation. The President interrupts. Since the DVD is run out of space, the Chamber would like to adjourn by now. The next session will be resumed by 1:30 p.m. Court officer is now instructed to assist Madam Sewopati during the adjournment and have her return to the courtroom when the next session resumes. Counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our client, Mr. Nuon Chea, is suffering from a headache, back pain, and a lack of concentration, and he would like to follow this afternoon's proceedings from his holding cell, and we have prepared the waiver.
The President, the Chamber notes the request made by Mr. Nuon Chea through his counsel, in which he has asked that he be allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell for the remainder of the day due to his health concerns. The Chamber notes that this request is appropriate, and that Mr. Nuon Chea is now allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell downstairs through video visual means. Mr. Nuon Chea has waived his right to be present in the courtroom. The Chamber asks that counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea produce the waiver signed or given some printed by Mr. Nuon Chea to the Chamber in due course. And AV booth officers are now instructed to make sure that the audio-visual link is well connected to the holding cell where Mr. Nuon Chea can observe the proceedings for the remainder of the day. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Nuon Chea and Khieu Samphan to their respective holding cell and have Mr. Khieu Samphan return to the courtroom when the next session resumes. The court is adjourned.